This is a really fascinating subject. Um, in doing my research for this talk, I mean, there are literally dozens of talks on the Maya because the archaeological research is ongoing, um, and there's constant revision of the view of what went on with them. Um, so there's always more information coming out. Uh, I will do the best I can to present this with the information that I have at this point. And if I'm off with any of it, don't hold me to this moving target, because I've gotten this information from a lot of different sources. Um, but basically, the Maya were a very highly developed culture. They flourished from around 200 AD to about 900 AD. That's known as the classical period, although there was a development up to that point, and the culture actually continues to this day. So there are still active indigenous Mayan rituals that are going on, and there's a fairly substantial population in Mexico, Guatemala, Central America. So the Maya developed a fairly complex mythological kind of animistic religious practice. The gods combined forms of human, jaguar, bird, snake, rabbit, turtle, vegetal, mineral forms, the sun, the moon, the stars, the waters. All these elements had powers and ruled in different ways, and were actually worshipped in different ways. The Maya in the Yucatan and Guatemala, and basically the Central American area, let's see, were in quite a bit of conflict. There was rivalry between the city-states. They would, at different points, have different alliances and go to war with one another, and so there was quite a bit of conflict. These the entire area was really rainforest. So it's heavily forested, and one of the reasons why the research is ongoing is many of the temples were just taken over by the surrounding rainforests, and just hard to get at. So let me go a little bit into this. The principal bird deity was not just wealth and riches personified, but simultaneously conceptualized as a mytho-historical figure, a deity associated with the beginnings of kinship and the foundations of human rule. One of the things that goes on between these city-states is they are competing for who can develop the highest artistic culture. They were competing as much for wealth as they were for artistic development, the refinements that went on over this period of time are really remarkable. So let me go here. Okay, so this is a throne back, um, and it's very skillfully carved. It's like the backrest, and there are all these supernatural features that are mixed into it. It's kind of hard to see. It in the center there is a kind of bird-like jaguar creature between the two figures. It's got a wing underneath its arm, and it's got a jaguar head. So these are kind of messengers from the underworld, from the gods to these two rulers. It's a little hard to tell male and female in a lot of these sculptures, and that was something that they did quite a bit of. There was sort of a gender fluid, shall we say, aspect to the images that depicted the kings and queens and the royalty. Okay, so this kind of situates us. Basically, this is a map of the area in Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and Belize, where the major settlements were. And again, there are a lot of contributing factors to the establishment, the flourishing, and the actual abandonment of many of these locations. It isn't that the culture went away, but basically, in the end of the 8th century, early 9th century, many of the cities were just walked away from. And there may be a lot of contributing factors. There may have been a drought. There may have been, basically overpopulation in the area. But this is one of the mysteries that many of the authorities that I've been listening to don't have a real concrete answer to, especially since actually a lot of they had a highly developed hieroglyphic kind of writing. They had books. They called them codexes and things like that. So that they were very literate. But many of those books were destroyed in the process of, when the Spanish came and decided that that idolatry was out. Many of those references are gone, and of course, you're talking about rainforests, so paper doesn't last real well in that kind of environment. Okay, Lives of the Gods. This show has more than 100 objects. It's really it's been about 5 or 6 years since the last survey of Mesoamerican art was shown, and there was a fabulous show 5 or 6 years ago at the Met, but that focused mostly on jewelry. This particular show focuses on the lives of the gods and the transformational aspects of interesting, complex supernatural beings that the Mayan belief system embraced. So there was a constant shift in these characters. So this is on the left is a sculpture of a captive who is dressed in a jaguar costume. Most likely didn't have a good end. There was some degree of human sacrifice that took place. It wasn't as rampant as has been depicted in some places. They were very much into trying to capture the royalty of the other city-states, and they were also interested in the craftsmen and artists. One of the other interesting parts about it is many of the works of art actually have the artist's name on them, which is really uncommon for many cultures around the world. You know, you don't get Egyptian artists signing their work. In Mesoamerica, in the Mayan, they signed, many of them signed their works, and there's over 100 artists that are known. So let's see. Well, let me move on here. Okay. All right. So this it's so deceptive on the screen. The sculpture on the left is 85 inches tall. So this is a big piece. It looks like a tiny thing here, but it's actually quite tall, and it's, you know, substantial. It's made of limestone, and this is the rain god. On this plate, this is an interesting little piece of information. The maize god is emerging from a split in this turtle, in the back of this turtle. Let me see. Let me get the zoom up so we can look at it a little bit closer. Okay, there we go. And so you can see that this, it's on the one side, in the front is the sun god casting light on the maize god, and on the on the left is the sun god. On the right is the moon watering the maize god, and it's sprouting out of this turtle, out of the dark waters. And again, you know, this is the rain god that's on the left. Okay. And this is you know, more of a close up, and I'm gonna close in on this one and talk a little bit in depth about this guy. So let's see. And you can see this fellow. He's got a club, these fantastic big bulging eyes, a reptilian mouth. He's reaching out with this tendril coming out of his hand, out of his left hand, and and sprouting out of the top of his head is this tree. Um, the dark marks on the bottom, these areas that are down in here at the base, are kind of dark water. It's reaching into the underworld. It's actually and those round things are supposed to be water lilies. So a little trip around this fantastic piece, you can see all these different, there's this kind of jaguar-like head up here at the top, and around the edges there's all these scroll-like vegetative elements and creatures. So I'm gonna go back. Fantastic being with human torso and bracelet bedecked arms, holding an axe in his right hand. The god of the black water. Mayan artists mined the rich body of mythological lore to visualize their gods in imaginative ways. I mean, this is really kind of like Hieronymus Bosch. I mean, there's these fantastic creatures that come out of their imaginations, and you see these symbols in there. Those are really the hieroglyphics. So this is there were books and books written with these symbols in them, but they're gone. So we do have these though, and beautifully painted. Well, I'll talk more about that. Okay, so these are sensors. They basically are kind of stands that they would put bowls on top of with incense. So it's really kind of a hyper sensory ritual practice that was involved with these things. They would put these bowls with incense on them, and the smoke was kind of a mystical here and gone thing. The scent would be there. They would propitiate the gods with food and drink, prayer, music, and dance, and offered nourishment to the gods to appease them and encourage them to grant, favors. So these fantastic, heads. Okay. And again, this conch shell trumpet. And this is actually a relatively recent shot of one of the ritual practices. You can imagine that that all these nuts that act as rattles make quite a bit of sound when this dancer moves about. And again, we're back to the bird, the different animal aspects and animal forces as one of the things that they do in the show is kind of break it down into sections where creation, day, night, rain, maize, knowledge, and patronage to the gods. So the exhibition is actually broken into sections in that way. It's pretty interesting, and would be even more interesting for you after listening to my talk. You'll start to look at some of this stuff. Now they do have a really good kind of acoustic guide that goes along with it, and there's a number of YouTubes that I'll recommend at the end that are well worth watching before you go, if you go. Okay. So the dance and ritual are all very much a part of this. This is kind of how they attracted populations to different cities. They would have these competitions almost between city states for who could put on the greatest pageantry. Okay. Now, this is not in the exhibition, but I thought it was important to integrate at this point. Now, again, you see the horn playing, and the lavish costumes and crazy headdresses. One of the things that they did was this is a fresco, and basically what they would do is use a slurry of lime to create the ground, which is a traditional fresco approach, and they would take pigment and paint that into the fresh lime. While the lime was still wet, they would paint into it. So that's how they would get these really bright, vivid colors. And this is Rufino Tamayo, who is was a modern Mexican modernist who was indigenous. He was actually, let's see, what was he? Zapotec heritage. So, basically, this mural that's on the right is 12 by 40 feet. It's enormous. He kept his palettes very limited, but you can see him dealing with the stars and the moon and the sun. The Mayan had a very developed number system. They were very their calendar was very accurate. They did a lot of observation of the heavenly bodies. So they had astronomy was very much part of their practice, and mathematics. They had these giant stone slabs that had these elaborate number systems on the backs of them. So this was really part of their religious practice, trying to place themselves in the universe in some way, trying to understand, how these things worked, how the rhythms of nature worked, what the timing of events were. They were able to track things like eclipses and that kind of thing. So I bring in Tamayo just to say, the influences of the Mayan heritage are still present in modernist art. So I love the guy's work anyway. So this is a fragment, the handle of a scepter. So basically, there are all these drill holes in the handle, and there would be strings of beads and other, you know, dangling things like seeds and anything that would rattle and make sound. So these danglers would kind of, you know, um, announce the king's approach in a way. Um, and again, um, the pottery, um, this crocodile whistle rattle, um, is painted again. They used they didn't do glazes as far as I know. They used the lime and pigment to color their 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 pieces. Most of the stone pieces, actually, from my understanding, they painted many of the temples and tombs red with red paint. Um, so these would be quite remarkable and quite, you know, in the middle of a green forest, these red uh, colossal buildings would be standing there. Quite a remarkable um, look. And again, this is a captive, according to the inscription on the belly. This unfortunate warrior was captured, and they actually have the exact date that he was captured in that inscription. It was September 7th, 695. Um, and he was a ranking prisoner, and his name is on the monument. Um, he was a king of one of the other cities. Um, it highlights, you know, in the inscription, it highlights his victory and casts his triumph as analogous to the deeds of deities. He was likely killed in a sacrificial ritual, and he's dressed again in a jaguar god, reenacting the deity's defeat. So the gods with the Maya were a lot like, well, there's a parallel between Greek gods and many of the Mayan gods who, you know, would die and be reborn. Um, there were rivalries. There were different powers that different gods had. You know, I didn't explore all this to any great extent, but this is what I'm gleaning from what I've been able to understand um, so far. Uh, and so these are kind of hand modeled ceramic sculpture. Um, and they're depicting the maize god, and then there's also the ancestor aspect. One of the things that I heard them talk about in some of the lectures is basically they would bury family members within the compound, so the ancestors were there with them, and you know, kind of this business of an ancestor emerging from a flower, you know, kind of the communication with the ancestors was part of this spiritual practice or the spiritual belief system. The maize god, very important, consumption, rebirth, death and rebirth, renewal. By the way, if there's any questions that come up during this, put it in the chat, and Joan will get it to me if any of it's really directly relevant to what I'm talking about at this point. The young maize god has idealized features. Basically the center character I'm talking about now. His facial features are elongated. He wears a fringed headdress, perhaps feathers, flattened and turned fringes at the center. Yeah. His arms are kind of atop this folded leaf. So it's a really interesting, set of motifs that they bring up with these pieces. Okay, and speaking of ancestor worship, so these are, the artists display a great deal of imagination in portraying these kind of grotesque features. They're really finely modeled, and they're painted. Again, you can see the remnants of the paint. These are respected elders. They are aged gods. Strange, kind of amusing. They one of the things is they did have a sense of humor about some of this. It can be deadly serious at times, but a lot of this, they're pretty funny caricatures that they've got going here. And Frida, again, Frida had indigenous blood, Frida Kahlo. I'm going to go into more depth on her work next week. We're going to be doing Frida Kahlo, because there is a show that's next week, not next week, 2 weeks from now. We're going to be going into her in depth, but in the meantime, her kind of surrealist, magic realism and folk art roots are very much grounded in the Maya. And here you see Self-Portrait with Monkeys from 1943. I leave you my portraits so that you will have my presence all the days and nights that I am away from you. Again, this sacrificial element, the wounded deer. On the one hand, historians kind of look at her and interpret her work biographically. She suffered a great deal in her lifetime, though she had a well-known interest in the kind of esoteric notions that were going on with the Maya and with kind of metaphysical spirituality. And there is that element in her work, this death and rebirth business, the sacral element of bloodletting, which was very much a part of the Mayan religious. The nobles, the king and the queen, all used sacrificial or sacral bloodletting as part of the rituals to cleanse and call the gods. Okay, and here is a contemporary deer dance, Mayan deer dance. So Frida was drawing from things that she perhaps saw around her. And they were big chocolate fans. So coca was a very valued property. The coca seed was something that they valued a lot. They would trade with them, and they would make these concoctions of coca and different spices, and they didn't sweeten them, so they were very savory and powerful concoctions. Now, the other question that comes up and came up for me is what else were they mixing in with that stuff? Because there are plenty of hallucinogenic roots and mushrooms that were available to them. So some of these fantastic visions that we see in some of this artwork, I would venture a guess that there might have been some pharmacological assistance in bringing that vision to the fore. I'm just saying, and I've heard that actually from a couple of the lectures that I've listened to. So again, this is inside the exhibition. Fantastic jaguar head on this sculpture. And look at this little guy on the bottom that this god is standing on top of. Again, the maize goddess. So these are images from this exhibit. And this kind of incised bone is a coronation, a ceremonial king and or queen coming into their reign. And on the right, again, the sense of humor on these guys. The rabbit was a trickster god, and so this is an image of the maize god holding the trickster rabbit in his lap. Really interesting. And again, sense of humor. There's this old lecherous guy pulling up the skirt of this woman. He doesn't look like he's much of a catch at this stage of the game, and she definitely looks like she's in control of the situation. But there's again, there's this the pigment, the painted object. Um, okay, and this is one of the city states that was on the Caribbean um, side of the Yucatan toward the end. Um, and they would these city states would the people would have um, around the city, around the structures at the center of the city, they would have wooden huts. So all of that is gone at this stage of the game. Many of the actual temples and all that were just so overgrown in the rainforests, and there just appear to be mounds at this point. So and also there's been a lot of pilfering of the artifacts and things like that. So and this is one of their ball games. And I don't know, didn't find out what the ball was made of, but they wear these giant padded rigs around their chest, so that ball must have been pretty heavy. They were very much into competing and showing off their prowess. Um, I tried to get an idea of the life expectancy of the Mayans in the classic period, and what I got was somewhere between 30 and 50. But it was a very, stressful, competitive time in many ways. And this is a jade headdress, very beautiful ornamentation. And this is a whistle, ceramic flute. I didn't get the part where I should have turned it all the way around so you could see the holes that they used to make the sound with. But again, beautifully painted. And these are death masks. So when the king and the queen and the nobles would die, they would be entombed in the temples, and they would have these death masks and bejeweled, just incredible. Now, there's not a lot of this jewelry and gold in this particular show, because they did cover that in the show that happened about 6 years ago. I believe it was 6 years ago. But I figured I'd show that to you so you would have some idea of the kind of opulence, that level of dazzle that was part of the culture at the time. And Joseph and Annie Albers, who are both, basically well-known artists, modernists, went to Mexico and were very much inspired by what they saw there. Annie Albers is in this, and she's Joan. Did you have a question?
It's not necessarily a question. It's somebody asked if it was tomato Mayan, and then somebody said Chappaqua Mayan. Is that the name of the town? Did you mention it?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
No. I'm not even trying to pronounce the names of these things.
Okay.
It's beyond me.
Well, I know one word. Okay.
Yeah. So the central photograph is Annie Albers working with local weavers, and on the left you see one of her weavings. On the right you also see one of her weavings. And this is Joseph Albers. This is one of his photographs on the right, and one of his works. He was very much a one of the innovators of color theory, and very influential. He taught at Yale, taught at the Bauhaus, and Black Mountain College. And you can see the structural stuff that he took, the geometric structural stuff that he was so attracted to in the Mayan. Okay, and again, Tulam. This is the same city that I showed earlier from a different direction. And I didn't go there and take this photograph. I wish I did. Okay, and I talked about the ritual business, the ritual sacrifice, the bloodletting as part of the king and queen. And what you see here is actually the queen with this thorned rope going through her tongue to let blood for this particular ritual. And there's a container in front of her to catch the blood. The king also let blood, but that's a different conversation that I'm not going to have right now. So this is one of the bird, man, jaguar characters in their mythology, and very beautifully crafted things. And imagine what this was like when it was painted. You can see some traces of the color, but these are magnificent things. And you know, there's this avian aspect. You can see that claw down toward the bottom of the thing, and the wings. But they combine the jaguar and the bird and the snake and all these elements in one god. And this again is one of the views of the show. And right now what is his name? Michael Rockefeller, the Rockefeller wing, which is oceanic, Mesoamerican, and African collection, which is fabulous, is closed until 2025. They're renovating it and they're rethinking the collection. It's over 40,000 square feet of space, and they're reconfiguring the exhibition. Meanwhile, these a few of these pieces, which you see right here, one of the kings, are in the lobby of the Metropolitan. So there's a lot to see there. There's also a wonderful kimono show in the Japanese wing, the Japanese gallery of the Asian wing. Well worth going to see. So there are some really great videos. There's Lives of the Gods, the virtual opening through the Met, but there's just, like I said, there are at least a couple of dozen talks on the Maya. If your interest is piqued, check it out on YouTube. And in 2 weeks, we're going to do Frida Kahlo. So
Okay, there's
that's it.
one question.
Yes.
And somebody wrote, Lori, the Maya played sports with a rubber ball the size of a softball and a soccer ball. They would throw it through a stone hoop, stone hoops attached to the side of the wall.
Okay.
Sounds a lot like basketball.
Yes.
Kind of interesting.
It's a combination of soccer and basketball.
Sounds interesting. And then she also wrote that the Mayans built observatories in their cities and positioned them with the movements of celestial bodies like the equinox and whatnot.
Yes.
Which is, I think I went to see Chichen Itza, and I think that was one of the highlights.
It's absolutely fascinating.
It's amazing what we think of as a primitive culture, but was sophisticated in so many ways.
Yes.
And at the very end, this has nothing to do with today's lecture, but one of our patrons asked, do you have a favorite lecture that you would recommend if you had to prioritize? For the Maya? No, for I imagine for any of your programs.
Oh God.
Because this person hasn't attended all of them. So she knows that there are so many.
Okay.
She wants to be able to figure out where to start.
Gotcha. Well, one of the most popular ones was the one that I did on Joan Mitchell.
Right.
That got thousands. Literally, it's over 10,000 hits at this stage of the game. So there's a number of them that, it's according to what your taste is. Fairfield Porter was a wonderful talk. People loved the talk that I did on Hopper, and the Hopper show is still up until this weekend. So that's worth a shot. So there you go.
Okay, that's enough. All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Larry. As usual, it was fascinating. I love this Mayan art.
Yeah.
I love the Mayan culture. And thank you all for coming. And don't forget, we have programs going on next week at the library. On the 9th is the Jewish Deli. On the 13th, we have the foreign policy on water scarcity. And in the evening, Kevin Pilkington, an in-person program. So I hope we see you and have a wonderful weekend. Bye, everyone. Bye, Larry.
Great. Bye.